Hi, welcome to Jade Kind Gaming. My name is Adam. Today I will be doing a review, sort of a flip-through review of the Player's Handbook of the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons by Wizards of the Coast. I've been, pretty much this book I've actually read basically cover to cover. And I loved it. I'm my group's game master, and while I have been running GURPS lately, with this I'm switching back to Dungeons & Dragons after more than a year away from it, from any, even like Pathfinder, any iteration based on Dungeons & Dragons, just because it looks fun. So admittedly, if you're looking for a hard-hitting review, this won't be it. I really love it, and it's more of a praise. But I'm going to go through, I've got a few notes. I'm going over some of my preferred, some of the things I loved most in it, some things I found interesting, things like that. But let's get started. Alright. One thing, they all reference themselves, all of the 5th edition books say whatever, something about the world's greatest role-playing game. I don't like saying what's greater than what, but, well, they're fine to call themselves that, apparently. But anyways, this is everything a player needs to create heroic characters for the world's greatest role-playing game. There's table of contents. Make sure we're focused. Anyways, one thing, having read it cover to cover, that I loved, that a lot of people might have missed, is there's this preface by Mike Merles, who, if you followed the whole playtest for the game, you'll probably have known. But it's worth a read, and I just wanted to read sort of this, his last words here when he wrote this, and that is, "Go forth now. Read the rules of the game and the story of its worlds. But always remember that you are the one who brings them to life. They are nothing without the spark of life that you give them." The book feels like it's written by people who love the game. That's just... So yeah, part 1 is creating a character. Of course, we get, the book is full of lovely art. And here we have what feels like a collapsing tower towards this dragon, as this guy is like, I'm gonna hit him with my mace. Yeah. Step-by-step characters. They go over character creation. By the way, one thing, a little criticism. It's in here that you get your armor. If you don't wear armor, this is where you know that your armor class is 10 plus your dex mod. They don't actually mention the not wearing armor anywhere else, including in the armor section where under weapons they do mention not wielding a weapon. They have unarmed for a weapon, but they don't have no armor in the armor chart. So that's where that's located. If you were having trouble finding it, I did. Of course, from previous editions, I knew what it was going to be, but still. Yeah, I don't know if my camera captures it great, but that's a lovely piece of art of a sort of just a party around a campfire overnight. We get our races, dwarves, and with each race we have a couple variants. Elves, halflings, and humans are the 4 that they call the main races, and then they have the uncommon races, which include dragonborn, gnomes, half-elves, half-orcs, and tiefling. I decided gnome was sort of the one I was going to go over, just sort of what they do with the races. They have like little text, and they have like essentially description, very vivid description of what the race is kind of like. And then it thought-invoking, I suppose, would be the word. But then they have the go over names. They go over the basic traits for the race. Like in here, it's ability scores, age, alignment, size, speed, etc. And down all the ones that have a subrace. Subrace is the last item in there. And then we get the 2 variants. Forest Gnome and Rock Gnome. And Gnomes I chose because they have a couple of the variants that I love the most. The Forest Gnome is the natural illusionist ability. It gets Dex increased by 1, and it has this Speak with Small Beasts, which is one of the things in 3.5, they had their Speak with Small Burrowing Mammals like once per day or whatever it was. Like, that was a scary ability. Like, they were concerned that that was the ability that someone was going to abuse. And that is silly. It is a very flavorful ability used for roleplay. So they just go ahead and say that if you're a Forest Gnome, you can just do that. And it's not even burrowing, it's whatever, such as badgers, rabbits, moles, woodpeckers, other creatures, and they'll commonly keep them as beloved pets. It's flavor, and it's one that I find fun. Alternatively, the Rock Gnome, which has the Artificer's Lore, and it's their con instead of their dex that increases, they have a Tinker ability, which allows them to make small clockwork devices, like a toy, or a music box, or a fire starter. They have a little image of one there. And that's just, again, fun. So yeah, the races have flavor, and they have things like that that can just be roleplay based. Alright, and then we go into classes. We get the chart here in the beginning. For the most part, they've kept classes 1 or 2 primary abilities, or one primary ability, maybe a second kind of thing. Not so much 3 and 4 like some of the previous editions had. I have one of my players loves this art for the Barbarian. I gotta agree, it goes a little against the type that one might usually consider. Because usually you think of the Conan, but this is that. Essentially the classes begin. This box right here is usually 3, I think fighters have 6, but essentially examples like of that class in action. Then they go over some basics of, things about the class, giving it more flavor, how to create one, a quick build if you're in a hurry, of course the chart, and what the features are. And all of the classes, like the races, have paths, or domains, or something, essentially, where you get to make a change. Like, let's see, which is it? Like the Bards have a college. Bards actually is one of the ones I do have a little nitpick on. Most of the classes have wonderful 20th level abilities. Bards are just one that feels lackluster. Essentially, it is that you get that whenever you roll initiative, start combat, and have no uses of Bardic Inspiration left, you regain 1 use. At this point, you regain all of your expended uses of Bardic Inspiration when you finish a short rest, or long, but... So all you have to do, in other words, if you've used all your inspiration and haven't had a 10-minute break, then you can get 1 use. If it was you regain all of them, or even if it was just, even if you even have, every time you roll inspiration, regardless of how many you have, you regain 1 use. Or something. It's just too restricted. But that's just me. That was one of the things that going through, because a lot of the classes have really fun 20th level abilities. Clerics, their variant is their domains, which weaves them with quite a few. Life, light, nature, trickery, war, tempest, etc. You get the druid. The druid does not have an animal companion. That is just the ranger in 5th edition. But they do have their wild shape, of course. That's why I'll use them as an example of a cool 20th level ability. Because at first, theirs is at 20th level, you can use your wild shape an unlimited number of times. That just removes the restriction. Cool. But then if you turn the page, you realize it continues. Because I was happy with it then. Additionally, you can ignore the verbal and somatic components of your druid spells, as well as any material components that lack a cost and aren't consumed by a spell. You gain this benefit both in your normal shape and your beast shape from wild shape. So in other words, now all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of spells you couldn't cast before that you can now cast while in wild shape, which you can use unlimited times. That's a really cool and fun 20th level ability. I'm just not happy with bards. Oh well, if I play a bard I won't go quite to 20. I'll multi-class out. Paladins, they have 3 different... The paladins have their sacred oaths as their types. There's the Oath of Devotion, Oath of the Ancients, and Oath of Vengeance, each of each have their tenets and, of course, the abilities that they give them. The Oath of Vengeance I love. It's sort of a just the overview. You're after a greater evil, and you can be merciful to lesser evils, but not to this whatever great evil you're devoting yourself against. And you will end that evil by any means necessary, and you view it as your own fault for any suffering that others do for however long it takes you to end it. It's almost that sort of, almost evil-ish, but not, version of a paladin. It's a dark kind of paladin without really being evil, I suppose. I just find it quite fun. The Rangers have their companion with one of their archetypes, which I always love. I love pets. I love having pets. Of course, the Rogue, the Sorcerer. We have the Warlock, and the Wizard, which has its arcane traditions, abjuration, conjuration, divination, enchantment, evocation, illusion, necromancy, and transmutation as what its different types of classes. And they managed to give some fun stuff to each of those variants. So they make you choose one of those, but they just add extra fun stuff to it. We get Chapter 4 is Personality and Background, Basics, Alignment, Languages, and then they go over ideals, bonds, flaws, and personality traits, which are fun things which essentially each background, which is a part of your character, gives you sort of an a role chart which you can just sort of pick from, or whatever you'd want to do to essentially choose what personality of your character. They really help build a character before you've actually played it. But yeah, essentially the background is, as opposed to your class, which is what you continue in, it is what you start with. Generally they'll give you skill proficiencies, either tool proficiencies or a language. If you're not using the boring method of equipment, they give you part of that along with your class. They give you generally an ability, criminals have a contact that they know, and they have suggested characteristics. And there are quite a few: entertainer, guild artisan, hermit, noble, sage, outlander, sailor, soldier, urchin, so it'd be a street urchin. And they're fun. It's like some of the equipment that they have is just very flavorful for them, because some is useful, a small knife, but also a map of the city you grow up in, a pet mouse, a token to remember your parents by, a set of common clothes, and a boat patch containing 10 gold. It's just, they use things like equipment to help build the character. I enjoy it. And of course they do have starting equipment that can be done with, you get whatever based on class, you get this much money, boring version. Anyways, so once we get our equipment, see, no unarmored option here, but if you go to weapons, unarmored strike is listed. Some of the tools. So equipment's fun. We get waterborne vehicles here, and it's sort of just the name, the cost, and how fast it is. That chart is expanded in the Dungeon Master's Guide, because it just felt like this is not enough information. It's not, and they know that. That's just the purchase chart. The rest of the information for them is in the Dungeon Master's Guide. They have where is that, right here? Lifestyle expenses, essentially how much per day it costs you to live at different, between a wretched and an aristocratic lifestyle, and then they sort of give you what you get for that, and that's covering your food, if you have housing, sleeping accommodations, all that, essentially with a daily cost, instead of having to make you each day pay for food, pay for, time it in, whatever, make up that. It's just a quick way of doing that. Alright, we got this trinkets chart here. And I love it. The idea here is trinkets. When you make your character, you can roll once on the trinkets table to gain a trinket, a simple item, lightly touched by mystery. And the DM might also use it to help stock a room, and I know I personally will. Just a couple of them. 10 here. The deed for a parcel of land in a realm unknown to you. A silver badge in the shape of a 5-pointed star. A vest with 100 tiny pockets. A tiny chest carved to look like it has numerous feet on the bottom. A dead sprite inside a clear glass bottle. 2 toy soldiers, one with a missing head. A candle that cannot be lit. Let's see, some of them are clearly magic too. A purple handkerchief embroidered with the name of a powerful archmage. I know there's like something like one of them's like a spider that moves around when nobody's looking around it, like a mechanical spider that moves around when no one's looking at it. And there's like a stone that has no weight. But yeah, they're essentially just things which, to me, these are, again, help you build your character. Why do you possess this item, kind of thing. But yeah. So. Customization options, they have multi-classing, which has requirements. They require whatever certain skill. And then essentially they give you what you actually get for multi-classing. So you don't get the full advantage of that first level, that huge chunk. And they go over exactly how it works, as well as how spells, slots, and spellcasting works between multiple classes, etc. They also have the feats, which are an optional rule, but essentially when your character gains an ability score increase, you can instead take a feat. If you're familiar with at least 3rd edition, they are more powerful than that. But certainly, there are some interesting things. One of the ones that I will often take, I believe, is this Magic Initiate, and it's sort of that you get some spells. Just because even if I'm not a spellcasting class, I often like to have just a couple spells. It's fun. Anyways, part 2 is playing the game. Again, more art. I love this piece of art. It's sort of... Essentially, you got... I don't know if you can see it quite well. There's like a guard looking the other way here. And it's a thief drifting in from the ceiling on these ropes and lifting up this giant's helmet. And it's this beautiful blue... It's clearly some sort of almost art gallery kind of thing. I love it. Anyways, they go over using ability scores, ability checks, what different abilities are used for, hiding, and etc. Chapter 8 is adventuring, and it goes over time and speed and travel pace and how you work all of that out while you're going through places, traveling over land, different environmental things, falling, vision, suffocating, food and water, etc., social interaction, and then also resting for regaining health. They give the default assumptions, though there are more options for how these will work in the Dungeon Master's Guide. But essentially that's all the stuff for during the adventure, and then between adventures is one of the things that I absolutely love, where they have the downtime activities such as crafting, just practicing a profession, working a job, recovering, doing research or training. And they have more of these options in the Dungeon Master's Guide, but these are the basics of just the fact that you do stuff. That you may go delve through a dungeon, but then before you have another adventure, you might have 4 months. And it's sort of a quick and easy way to go through that in-between time. And have your characters gain something from the time, but not have to just spend all of it, roleplay it all out. However, sometimes that is fun. I've run whole campaigns where it is based on that sort of what do you do not out on an adventure. Chapter 9 is combat, and by default, the combat in the book expects what is essentially theater of the mind, though they do have a variant rule playing on a grid in this little box, and then they have several pages of that variant for either square or hex maps in the Dungeon Master's Guide. But by default, it works with you don't have to have miniatures and all that. You can just play it sort of imagination kind of thing. Which is, having read it, it feels like the best default assumption. Part 3 is magic, which isn't really the rest of the book, but it's a big chunk of it. Essentially, all of that is magic, and most of it is spells. But essentially, yeah. First it goes over how spellcasting works. I love this little illustration for the different areas of effect. With the little gnome guy. We get our spell lists. One thing I wish they'd have done is I wish that they would, in 3rd edition they had, the spell lists were divided up by the, what type of magic it was. Abjuration, Conjuration, etc. Which, given some of the classes, like, essentially the spellcasting variants of Rogue and Fighter, it would be really helpful to have that already in here. It doesn't... You can make it work. At the very least, I hope they end up putting out a chart. Otherwise, eventually I may end up putting one together, and if I just give up and do that, if Wizards takes too long, I'll find a way to get it out to y'all. But essentially, yeah, it's, of course, the list of spells, and in here, they have art in sections throughout it. There are certainly pages where it just goes without it, but you know, you get the art for Burning Hands. Yeah, just pages of spells. Let's see, there were a couple I wanted to go over though. One is Druidcraft. I don't know if this was a spell previously. I know in 3rd edition there was Prestidigitation. In this edition, there is also Druidcraft and Thaumaturgy, which is essentially the Druid and the Cleric version of Prestidigitation. They all do slightly different things. Like Druidcraft, though, you can... they're cantrips, which means you can use them unlimited times. And they're essentially the list of you can do multiple things. Like Druidcraft is you create a timely, harmless sensory effect that predicts the weather. So, for example, over the next 24 hours in location, for example, a golden orb for clear skies, a cloud for rain, falling snowflakes for snow, and so on. So you get sort of a weird sort of magic effect to tell you what the weather's going to be. You can instantly make a flower blossom, a seed pod open, or a leaf bud bloom. You create instantaneous harmless sensory effects such as falling leaves, a puff of wind, etc. Or you can instantly light or snuff out a candle, torch, or a small campfire. Just some fun little things that just sort of give you that feeling of magic that because of the way cantrips work here, you can do unlimited amounts of times. Just sort of that easy, fun feel for magic. Oh, that reminded me. I forgot to put that on my list. Spellcasting requires you to have... A lot of it requires you essentially to have a focus or something. Where you can essentially either use... Let's see, where is it? It's close. Yeah, you could either use a focus or like a component pouch for a lot of spells. Essentially any spell that requires a material component that doesn't have a cost or isn't consumed, you can just use a focus or spell component pouch. Which would be something like a focus, though, when I first read it was boring. But when I read what they are, it's a crystal, an orb, a rod, a staff, a wand. It's the flavor of your wizard casting their spells using a magic wand. I enjoy that just as a visual mindset. They've now given a reason why, when you're not casting a spell that a magic wand has in it, you would use a wand to cast your magic. So I just thought that was cool. A couple pages further. If you're wondering what happened to familiars, they're here. Likewise with the Paladin's Steed, it is a spell now, which ultimately means because it's the first level for the familiars with that feat that I pointed out to gain magic. Anyone can get a familiar just by taking that feat. Yay, pets. Anyways, but yeah, essentially this is where familiar is. Other than the fact that it took me a while to find it, I do enjoy it being here. It's a wizard spell. And it just goes over how familiars work. Essentially they're not really an animal, they're either a fae, fiend, or celestial, I think. Yeah. And they take the form of an animal. Anyways, fun, flavorful. Also, I'll note, Finger of Death right here is the only method to get a undead, like a zombie, that is permanently under your control. Any other type is going to, eventually, like after an amount of time, you have to re-control it or it becomes uncontrolled. But Finger of Death gives you one that is permanently under your control. Anyway, spells, 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 spells. 282. And I wanted to point something out, like, Teleportation Circle was one of the ones I found to give it as an example. It's essentially a place to teleport to with certain things, but at the end here, you can create a permanent teleportation circle by casting this spell in the same location every day for 1 year. There are a few spells that have that kind of thing where ultimately, if you just have free time for a year, you can make a location have permanently an effect. Like Teleportation Circle here, or there's others in other places. Of course, we finished through the last spell, Zone of Truth, and then we have the Appendices at the end. Appendix A is conditions, which essentially go over the different conditions for your character, and they have little bits of art for each one, which can be silly at times. But that's A. B is Gods of the Multiverse, essentially going over briefly creating a pantheon, more of that in the Dungeon Master's Guide. And then they also go over fantasy historical pantheons. Greek, Egyptian, Norse, etc. The C is the planes of existence, that gives a brief overview of the multiverse. It is the full Great Wheel. From what I understand, it's back to, of course, the full one like was in 3rd edition that I think was taken out of 4th, but whatever they did in 4th is actually what they've put in the inner part. More or less, it looks fun. And there's a lot more on this in the Dungeon Master's Guide. They also have D, which is creature statistics, and these are mostly the kind of things that you either use for if you have a familiar, or an animal companion, or some summons. They also have the skeleton and the zombie that you can have under your control. Essentially, they are the creatures that you might need as a player. So they provide those in the Player's Handbook. Of course, they are again in the Monster Manual. And E is inspirational reading, and they're lists of books and kind of things, including a little excerpt from the Dungeon Master's Guide from 1979 by Gary Gygax. And then, of course, the index, followed by the character sheet, which you could, of course, scan out of here, but really they have it online, easy to get, and you don't have to go through that work. So that, my dear friends, is the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook. It's great fun. over the next couple weeks, I will be reviewing the Monster Manual and Dungeon Master's Guide as well. I'm still working my way through the Dungeon Master's Guide. I only skimmed the Monster Manual as opposed to fully reading through this. I'm not sure exactly what method I'm using for the Dungeon Master's Guide, but I'm generally this and what's online is enough to really play the game to get started. But generally, this is enough, especially if you're a player. If you're a player, this is all you really need. If you're going to run the game, highly suggest the other two. Ultimately, in my group, I refuse to actually start running a game until the Dungeon Master's Guide was not only out, but I managed to go pick it up, which took me a while. But anyways, yeah. Player's Handbook, 5th edition, Dungeons & Dragons, Wizards of the Coast. I'll find a link for you to get it online. Of course, if you have a local gaming store, I'm sure if you're watching it anywhere around the time that I'm actually putting this video out, they probably have it in stock. It's a pretty big item right now. It's fun. But yeah, and we're looking forward to, of course, with the new year, they're announcing whatever other books will be coming out. I know the Dungeon Master Screen will be here soon. Don't know if I'll get it or not. I know there's another Adventure Path and the Adventurer's Handbook that comes with that. Something, elemental abilities. So there's also, they've already begun support for the game beyond the core rule books. Will be arriving soon. But yeah, Player's Handbook, check it out. Have a great day. Bye.